Original plans for WrestleMania 22. Recently on the channel, we have gone back and looked at original plans for WrestleMania 23, and my favorite WrestleMania of all time as well, WrestleMania 21. But what about the WrestleMania right in between? I'm talking WrestleMania 22, Allstate Arena, Chicago, Illinois, 2006. And although it is my second favorite WrestleMania of all time, next to 21, it's a great WrestleMania. In my personal opinion, things could have been different, and some of these are more well documented than some of the other things that we've talked about recently this week. But I want to dive in, give my thoughts, and literally found an article from 2013 that I remember reading in 2013, and I made a YouTube video talking about Shawn Michaels and Eddie Guerrero possibly was going to happen at WrestleMania 22 before Eddie's passing. And I say that because if you've ever seen this image on the internet, looking up Eddie, Shawn, Mania 22, just know this exact image, very plain, but just the Eddie, Shawn, and Mania logo, I made it back in 2013 when I was making YouTube videos. I've been on here for a while, guys. I'm only 25, but I might as well have gray hair. I mean, I'm a veteran of this place, but I've seen this image stolen a bunch, but just know I made it, and if I went on the OG computer, I could probably find the Photoshop file for it because I saved everything back then. But nonetheless, let's dive into some of these WrestleMania 22 plans. So this is on Wrestling Inc. from November 13th, 2013 from Raj Giri, who I think a lot of people know if just, from social media and stuff. And Wrestling Inc. was like my go-to place back in the day. From like 2010 when I first started reading dirt sheets to like, I don't know, 2014, 2015, whenever Twitter just became like the spot to get your news every morning. Wrestling Inc. was like my go-to place back in the day, which is why I remember this so vividly. So it says original WrestleMania 22 plans for Eddie Guerrero. And it was from this show from earlier this week, whatever. Earlier this week, meaning in 2013. So let's read this a little bit. It says it was 24 hours before he passed away, I believe. 24 hours, 48 hours, something like that. We had a call with Vince at home, and we were talking about the preliminary. Let's just go early. Let's say early plans for WrestleMania. I know that there's this romanticized story about how Eddie was going to get the title and that there was plans that he was going to get it that night or at Survivor Series. That wasn't the plan, which is interesting with that sentence right there, because was that rumored back in the day? That's something I don't know for sure. Eddie Guerrero was challenging for the World Heavyweight Championship after he turned babyface once again. His last pay-per-view was against Batista at No Mercy in October 2005 for the World Heavyweight Championship. I don't know if it was rumored back then that Eddie might have been winning the World Championship either at Survivor Series or WrestleMania, but all these years later, we only have different set of rumors, so I don't know. It goes on to say, I think Stephanie said that or alluded to it on air, and that was not the plan. So I guess Stephanie McMahon was the one who alluded to, as they said, something with Eddie, but the plan was that he would lose, and I think that they were going to return in December. I don't know what they're talking about there, Eddie losing and return. I'm not sure what they're alluding to there, but regardless. We had talked about a fascinating idea, and I'm not the biggest Bruce Pritchard fan, neither am I, but to his credit, I believe it was Bruce Pritchard who pitched Eddie Guerrero at WrestleMania against Shawn Michaels and doing the parallels of their careers, being the heartthrob in Mexico, and of course Shawn Michaels was like the American version of that. It says they have never really worked, and to my knowledge, I can't think of one time that they worked, so forget never really. I mean, I don't remember anything. I don't even remember them ever being on the same brand, because like when Eddie came into WWE, Shawn was out for those 4 years. I mean, maybe they were on the same brand for like a month or two in 2002, but then Eddie jumped to SmackDown. That was pretty much it. So never really crossed paths at all with anything. You would have had such a great dynamic between the two with heel Eddie versus Shawn, which is also interesting because Eddie had just turned babyface, so he would have had to turn heel again. I guess he was kind of tweener at the time, but he was more babyface if anything. That would be your tear down the house, high quality match at WrestleMania 22 in Chicago. Vince was like, God damn, that's really appealing. We could parallel their careers, and I'm sure Vince probably was going to go on to take credit for it as if it was his idea. What kind of footage of Eddie do we have outside of WCW? Blah, blah, blah. So just talking about Eddie Guerrero and Shawn Michaels. Now, again, this is something that we've kind of known for years. It's been out there for years. Eddie and Shawn would have been huge for WrestleMania 22 because especially look at what Shawn Michaels ended up doing. It was clearly a B plan with Vince McMahon, something that didn't kick off till December of 2005, I believe, that story with Shawn and Vince. And then listen, it led to a pretty solid no-holds-barred match at WrestleMania 22, and then that bled into basically DX feuding with the McMahons for, 6 months in 2006? Like half the year. And that could have never happened had we gotten Eddie Guerrero versus Shawn Michaels. And it's interesting to think like how maybe the DX thing would have played in. Like, would somebody have eventually been by Eddie's side, which probably not Chavo, because Chavo just wasn't on the level of the rest of those guys, unfortunately. But imagine if it was heel Eddie on Monday Night Raw versus Shawn and Triple H, D-Generation X reuniting. Like, I wonder who could have been on Eddie's side. I know it's going past WrestleMania 22, but it's fun to imagine. And evidently, there was also plans for Bret the Hitman Hart, who was inducted into the Hall of Fame that year, versus Vince McMahon. We talked about a lot of matches, and the other match at WrestleMania 22 was going to be Vince versus Bret in a street fight. That would be due to a convoluted matter several WrestleManias forward. Bret had just come back into the company in a very formal way. He had just agreed to do the home video release, which I believe was his first DVD. The best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be. Vince, literally on that call, got Bret on the other line and pinched him doing the match. Bret was uneasy, but thinking he could possibly do it as long as there was no hits to his head, because obviously Bret was having some issues. We're sitting here like, holy shit, we didn't think that we'd be talking about a Bret versus Vince match. Vince pitched the match and said, what do you guys think? Everyone was like, yeah, no shit. And of course, Bret versus Vince. Yes, that's huge. A week or two later, Vince said that the match was no longer an option. I think it had something to do on Bret's end. Yeah, I assume Bret was the one who said no, because obviously Vince ended up wrestling and, you know, taking a beating at WrestleMania 22, so he probably would have did the same for Bret. And we did end up getting this match 4 years later at WrestleMania 26. I'm sure it wouldn't have been any more something to write home about in Chicago at 22. But I mean, it was an idea, I guess. One thing that is not listed here, and I'm not going to go try to pull up an article about this, but I know for sure, and there is information on this out there, that Batista versus The Undertaker was on the WrestleMania 22 card until Batista got injured and obviously had to vacate the World Heavyweight Championship. And it's super interesting because we look at the Rey Mysterio, Kurt Angle, and Randy Orton triple threat match that we did get for the World Heavyweight Championship. And of course, I'm not the one complaining. Rey Mysterio is my favorite wrestler of all time. 2006, seeing him win the Rumble, seeing him win the title. I was the last guy on this earth, me, little old Noah Nation in first grade. I was not complaining. But a lot of people look at that matchup and they go, he only won because of Eddie's passing. But when you really think about it, it's like, yes, they did play into Eddie's passing a lot, way too much in 2006. But even before that, or I should say during that time, like after Eddie's passing, Batista and Undertaker was probably still on the card up until Batista got injured and they were forced to pivot for the World Heavyweight Championship. And then really, you look at SmackDown at the time, they still could have gone Kurt Angle and The Undertaker because they put the title on Angle. Undertaker obviously still on WrestleMania 22 just working Mark Henry in a casket match. And looking back, I'm shocked they didn't do that. This plays into my last video with the WrestleMania 21 plans. Angle and Taker were evidently pitching to fight each other for the WWE title that year for SmackDown's main event, and it just didn't end up happening. But then they end up fighting at No Way Out in 2006 for the World Heavyweight Championship, and maybe the 2006 match of the year. I mean, definitely at least one of them. And like I mentioned, as much as I love Rey Mysterio and his World Championship win in 2006 at WrestleMania 22, going back, like, on a level head, like, I probably still would have told you to do Angle and Taker at WrestleMania if Batista couldn't go, because we saw the match we got. And listen, Angle, Orton, and Rey, legendary matchup, in my opinion. They're out there for 9 minutes, and it's a freaking classic. And you'd expect nothing less with those kind of guys in the ring. I'm just surprised, looking back, even with Eddie out of the equation, even if with Batista out of the equation, they still went with the matches they did for WrestleMania 22 with the triple threat and then the casket match, when you could have had Taker versus Angle for the world title. And then where that leaves Orton, Rey, and even Mark Henry, who really didn't come into SmackDown until it was time for that Batista feud, and then until he started feuding with some of the guys. I don't know if Mark Henry really would have ended up on Mania, but Orton and Rey, I'm sure they would have. I don't know where they lie, but it's just super interesting to think about, man. And that's why I've been really digging up these old plans as of late. One, just because it's getting me more and more hyped for WrestleMania this year. Plus, it's just cool to go back and speculate. You know, we do a lot of fantasy bookings and rebookings here on the channel, and sometimes it's not necessarily that something was bad or something was just absolutely, you know, awful and it should have gone a completely different way, but sometimes there's just alternate routes that it's like, it's a win-win either way, and it's cool to go down that alternate route and be like, man, we could have gotten this also. And I feel like that's the same thing for these WrestleMania 22 plans. Again, I still think WrestleMania 22 a great WrestleMania, my second favorite of all time, and really WrestleMania 21 only beats it because that is the show that got me in to professional wrestling. But 22 is up there. I love that show. But again, just like we talked about in the WrestleMania 21 video, that show could have been either just as good or maybe even better with some of the alternate matches, and maybe it could have been even better or just as good with some of these matches on the card as well. Eddie and Shawn, Vince and Bret, Batista and Taker, or Kurt Angle and Taker. Pick your poison. But again, it's just super interesting to talk about some of these OG WrestleMania plans for WrestleManias back in the day, because, you know, it's the same thing we do now, just speculate on what's going to happen in the future, but instead we're going back in time and speculating on what could have been. And definitely stay tuned to the channel. I'm going to try to dig up some more OG WrestleMania plans, and we're definitely going to be doing a rebooking later this week, probably near the weekend, so stay tuned. A rebooking of WrestleMania 23, which I think is a solid Mania. I just think the undercard could have been better, so we're going to rebook that show. Stay tuned. And overall, guys, be sure to drop a comment, leave a like, and subscribe on your way out. Go follow me across all social medias at Noah Nation Vlogs, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.